Okay, guys, so good morning and welcome. So, our topic today is about establishing requirements. So, week 8. Okay? So, our overview. So, the importance of requirements, different types of requirements, data gathering for requirements, data analysis and presentation, um, task description, scenarios, use case, essential use case, and task analysis or HTA. Um, an interaction design project may aim to replace or update an established system, or it may aim to develop a totally innovative product with no obvious precedent. So there may be an initial set of requirements, or the project may have to begin by producing a set of requirements from scratch. Whatever the initial situation and whatever the aim of the project, the user needs, requirements, aspiration, and expectation have to be discussed, refined, clarified, and probably rescoped. So this requires an understanding of, among other things, the user and their capabilities, their current tasks and goals, the condition under which the product will be used, and constraint on the product's performance. Establishing requirement is not simply writing a wish list of features. So giving the iterative nature of the interaction design, isolating requirements activities from design activities and from evaluation activities is a little artificial since in a practice they are all intertwined. Some design will take place while requirements are being established, and the design will evolve through a series of evaluation redesign cycles. So, however, each of these activities can be distinguished by its own emphasis and its own technique. So, what, how, and why? So, what needs to be achieved, and how can this be done? Okay, so there are two aims. One aim is to understand as much as possible about the user, their activities, and the context of the activity. So the system under development can support them in achieving their goals. Building on this. So our second aim is to produce a set of stable requirements that form a sound basis to start designing. This is not necessarily a major document, nor a set of rigid prescription, but it must not change radically in the time it takes to do some design and get feedback on the ideas. Because the end goal is to produce this set of requirements. Okay, so sometimes it refers to this as the requirements activities. So why bother requirements? So at the beginning of the requirements activity, there is a lot to find out and to clarify. At the end of the activity, we will have to set a stable requirements that can be the basis of the design activity. So in the middle, there are activities concerned with data gathering, analysis, interpretation, and presentation with the aim of expressing the finding as requirements. Broadly speaking, these activities progress in a sequential manner. So first gather some data, then analyze and interpret it, and then extract some requirements from it. So, but it gets a lot messier than this, and the activities influence one another as the process iterates. So, once you start data analysis, you will need to gather more data to clarify or to confirm your findings. Also, the way in which requirements are presented may affect your analysis since it will enable you to identify and express some aspect more easily than others. For example, using notation which emphasize the data characteristic of situation will lead the analysis to focus on this aspect rather than, for example, on a task structure, it emphasizes that it is valuable to use complementary set of data gathering and analysis techniques. So as we discussed below, there are different kinds of requirements. and each can be emphasized or de-emphasized by different techniques. So establishing requirements is itself an iterative activity, which the sub-activities inform and refine one another. It does not last for a set number of weeks or months and then finish. So in practice, requirements evolve and develop as the stakeholder interact with design and see what is possible and how certain facilities can help them. So as shown in the life cycle model, okay, the activity itself will be repeatedly revisited. Establishing requirement, what do user want, what do user need, and why establish. The activity of understanding what a product should do has been given a various labels. For example, requirements gathering, requirements capture, requirements elicitation, requirements analysis, and requirements engineering. So the first two imply that requirements exist out there and we simply need to pick up them or catch them. So elicitation implies that others knows the requirements and we have to get them to tell us. Requirements, however, are not that easy to identify. So you might argue that in some cases, customer must know what the requirements are because they know the task, the need supporting. However, they may not have articulated requirements as yet. And even if they have an initial set, they probably have not explored them in sufficient detail for development to begin. So the term requirements analysis is normally used to describe the activity of investigating and analyzing an initial set of requirements that have been gathered, elicited, or captured. Analyzing the information gathered is an important step since it is this interpretation of the facts rather than the facts themselves. So that inspired the design. Requirements engineering is a better term than the other because it's recognized that the development a set of requirement is an iterative process of evolution and negotiation, and one that needs to be carefully managed and controlled. So we choose the term establishing requirement to represent the fact that the requirements have been established from a sound understanding of the user needs and that they can be justified by and related back to the data collected. So current concern with the cross-cultural design have highlighted the importance of understanding who you are designing for, their specific circumstances, and how that to enrich their lifestyle. Okay, so Boller share and Boller requirements template. A requirement is a statement about an intended product that specifies what it should do or how it should perform. One of the aims of the requirements activities is to take the requirements as specific, uh, ambiguous, and clear as possible. For example, a requirement for a smartwatch GPS app might be that the time to load a map is less than a half second. So another, less precise example might be that teenagers should find a smartwatch appealing. So in the case of this another example, further investigation would be necessary to explore exactly what the teenager would find appealing. So requirements come in many different forms and many different labels of abstraction. But we need to make sure that the requirements are as clear as possible, that we understand how to tell when they have been fulfilled. So the example requirements shown, okay, in figure 10 is expressed using format code automatic requirement shell from the Boolean process. So this shell requires quite a bit of information about the requirements itself, including something called a fit criterion, which is a way of measuring when the solution meet the requirements. We emphasize the need to establish specific usability criteria for a product early on in development, and this part of the shell encourage this. Okay, so different kinds of requirements: functional, non-functional, and data. In software engineering, two different kinds of requirements have traditionally been identified. So functional requirement, which say that the system should do, and non-functional requirement, which say what the constraint there are on the system and its development. For example, a functional requirement for a new video game may be that it should be challenging for a range of user abilities. So this requirement might then be decomposed into more specific requirements detailing the structure of challenges. For example, the hierarchical level, hidden tips and tricks, magic object, and so on. So non-functional requirements for this same game might be that it can run on a variety of platforms such as Xbox, PlayStation, and Wii consoles. A different kinds of non-functional requirement would be that it must be delivered in 6 months' time. So these represent a constraint on the development activity itself rather on the product being developed. Mm. Functional requirements capture what the product should do. Okay. Another example, a functional requirements for a robot working in a car assembly plant might be that it should be able to accurately place and weld together the correct pieces of metal. Understanding the functional requirements for an iterative product is a fundamental. And data requirements capture the type, volatility, size, amount, persistence, accuracy, and the value of the required data. All interactive products have to handle some data. For example, if the system under consideration is a shared dealing application, then the data must be up to date and accurate, and it is likely to change many times a day. In the personal banking domain, data must be accurate, must persist over many months and probably years, and there is likely to be a lot of it. So environment of context of use. So environmental requirements or context of use refer to the circumstances in which an interactive product will operate. So four aspects of the environment must be considered when establishing requirements. First is the physical environment, such as how much lighting, noise, movement, and dust is expected in the operational environment. So will user need to wear protective clothing, such as large gloves or headgear that might affect the choice of interface type? Or how crowded is the environment? Another example, an ATM operates in a very public physical environment using a speech interface is therefore likely to be problematic. Okay. So the second aspect of the environment is the social environment. This issue raised in our previous lesson regarding the social aspect of interaction design, such as collaboration and coordination, need to be explored. So for example, will data need to be shared? If so, does the sharing have to be synchronous? Or does everyone need to be viewing the data at once? Uh, Authoring a report takes turns in editing. So other factors include the physical location of fellow team members. Collaboration need to communicate across a great distance. So these are the questions. Diba? So the third aspect is the organizational environment. Example is how good is user support likely to be, how easily can be obtained, and are there facilities or resources for training? How efficient or stable is the communication infrastructure, and so on. So finally, the technical environment will need to be established. So for example, what technologies will product run or need to be compatible with, and what technological limitation might be relevant. Okay, so underwater computing. Okay, so developing a computer for divers to take underwater has one major environmental factor. It is surrounded by water. Okay. So, however, the interface presented more challenges than waterproofing to the designer of the wet PC. So, underwater wearable computer. So, a miniature personal computer is mounted on the diver's air tank. A mass-mounted head-up display presents the diver with a floating display and a 5-button Cordic graphical user interface cord pad is attached to the diver's belt or chest. So divers typically have one hand free to operate the computer and are likely to be swimming and moving up and down in the water at the same time. So traditional interface design is no good. So the cord pad, like in our example, uh, has 5 keys, which can be passed in different combination to choose different menu items. It is supported by the floating display interface, which tells the diver which keys to press for which action. So wet PC have also designed C-Slate, which is operated by a 6-button keypad called Cord Grip. C-Slate can be used to search area of a C button. Divers can perform operations such as controlling the camera and sending message. So the system is also linked to GPS device that tells the divers where they are, which facilitates marking the location of mines and other underwater discoveries. Different kinds of requirements. Who are they? User characteristic capture the key attributes of the intended user group. In our previous lesson, we mentioned the relevance of a user abilities and skills, and these are important aspects of user characteristics. Other characteristics that may affect the designs are the user nationality, educational backgrounds, preferences, personal circumstances, physical or mental disabilities, and so on. In addition, a user may be a novice, an expert, a casual, or a frequent user. These affect the ways in which interaction is designed. For example, a novice user will require step-by-step instruction, probably with a prompting and a constraint interaction backed up with a clear information. An expert, on the other hand, will require a flexible interaction with more wide-ranging powers of controls. The collection of the characteristic for typical user is called user profile. So any one product may have several different user profiles. So what are the user capabilities? A person's physical characteristic may also affect the design. Size of hand may affect the size and the positioning of input buttons, and motor abilities may affect the sustainability of certain input and output device. Height is relevant in designing a physical kiosk. For example, strength in designing a child's toy. A toy should not require too much strength to operate, but may require strength greater than expected for the target age group to change batteries or perform other operations suitable only for an adult. Cultural diversity and experience may affect the terminology the intended user group is used to, or how nervous about technology a set of user may be, or how facility is used. So persona. A persona are rich description of typical user of products under development that the designer can focus on and design the product for. They don't describe real people, but are realistic rather than idealized. Any one persona usually represents a synthesis from a number of real users who have been involved in data gathering. Each persona is characterized by a unique set of goals relating to the particular product under development rather than a job description or job role. This is because goals often differ between people with the same job role, and people with very different job roles may have the same goals. So, example of a persona. Usually, a product will require a small set of personas, rather just one, and may be helpful to choose one primary persona who represent a large section of the intended user groups. Personas are used widely in industry and have proved to be a powerful way to communicate user characteristics and goals to designers and developers. Persona-driven development in example in City of London coupling system is based in City of London and provides a framework to investment banks that enables them to quickly build or enhance their single dealer offering or to create a single dealer platform for the first time. So the company has grown to use personas to increase the customer focus on their products by better understanding who they were developing their system for. Personas were seen as a way of provide a unified view of their user and to start building more customer focused product. So data gathering for requirements. So we have the interview, um, focus and focus group discussion. Okay, so overall, the overall purpose of the data gathering in a requirements activity is to collect sufficient, relevant, and appropriate data so that a set of stable requirements can be produced. Even if a set of initial requirements exists, data gathering will require to expand, clarify, and confirm those initial requirements. So data gathering needs to cover a wide spectrum of issues. So the tasks the user currently perform and their associated goals, the context in which the tasks are performed, and the rationale for the current situation. So first we have the interview. So interview are good for exploring issues, and semi-structured or unstructured interviews are often used early on to elicit scenarios. So in the context of establishing a requirement, it is equally important for developing team member to meet a stakeholder and for user to feel involved. So this on its own may be sufficient motivation to arrange interviews. Then the uh, focus group are good for gaining consensus view and highlighting areas of conflict and disagreement during the requirements activity. On a social level, it's also help for stakeholders to meet designer and each other and to express their views in public. It is not uncommon for one set of stakeholders to be unaware that their understanding of an issue or a process is different from another's, even though they are in the same organization. The generic idea of a focus group has been tailored for use with the requirements activity and requirements workshop have grown in popularity. So each workshop is carefully planned, attendees are carefully chosen, and specific deliverables are produced. Uh, Goat's Dinner suggests a very useful practical approach to requirements workshop that emphasize planning and deliverables, but also collaboration and facilitation. Then we have the questionnaire. Okay, so questionnaires may be used for getting initial responses that can then be analyzed to choose people to interview or to get wider perspective on a particular issue that have arisen elsewhere. So for example, a questionnaire might be used in order to gauge whether a new university online health service would welcome by students. So this questionnaire could ask impression and opinions about current support service and whether the respondent is prepared to be interviewed further. Or the questionnaire might be used to get in opinions and views about specific suggestion for the kind of help that would be most appreciated. So another reason to look at similar product is to help from requirements. Diba? Next, we have the direct observation and the indirect observation. Okay, so direct observation is the requirements activity observation of the participants in their natural setting. Is used to understand the nature of the task and the context in which they are performed. Sometimes the observation is carried out by the trained observer who record their findings and reports them back to the design team. And sometimes the observation is carried out by or with a member of the design team. Then, yung indirect observation, example, diaries and interaction logging are used less often with the requirements activity where a new product is under development. However, if a product is being developed uh, iteratively or is evolving from existing product, indirect observation and experience sampling are very valuable. Interaction logging together with sophisticated web analytics are particularly useful for improving system or websites. Okay, studying documentation. Studying documentation, manuals, and other documentation are good source of data about the step involved in activity and any regulation governing tasks. So documentation should not be used as the only source. However, as everyday practices may augment, taking a user-centered view of development means being interested in everyday practices rather than an idealized account. So studying documentation is good for understanding legislation and getting some background information on the work. It also doesn't involve stakeholder time, which is limiting factor on the other techniques. Okay, so some example. So this is a cultural proofs. So the idea of proof was developed during Present's project, which was investigating novel interaction techniques to increase the presence of elderly people in their local community. They wanted to avoid more traditional approaches such as questionnaires, interviews, or ethnographic studies and develop a technical cultural probes. These probes consisted a wallet containing 8 to 10 postcards, about 7 maps, or disposable with a disposable camera, a photo album, and a media diary. Recipients were asked to answer questions associated with a certain items in the wallet and then return them directly to the researcher. Inspired by the original cultural probe idea, different forms of probes have been adapted and adapted for a range of purposes. For example, design probes are objects whose form relates specifically for the particular question context. Okay, some example, ethnographic study, interview, user test. Okay, so ethnographic study, usability test, and user participation. It's a report on the design of multi-touch tablets user interface for collaborative exploration genomic data. Okay, so next, contextual inquiry. So the contextual inquiry is one of the 7 parts of the contextual design, which is a structured approach to the collection and interpretation of data from fieldwork with the intention of building a software-based product. Contextual design involves the production of 5 different models of work. So contextual inquiry is a popular technique for uncovering requirements, and in particular in uncovering requirements relating to the context of use. For example, it's used contextual inquiry over a period of 6 weeks to investigate how car drivers interact with the multi-function rotating button often found in the center of the car dashboard. So the study highlighted that the comfort, safety, and security factor were mentioned most often, while visual and haptic aesthetic were not mentioned by any participants. So this finding informed the design of a new in-a-vehicle information system. The contextual inquiry is a approach that emerged from the ethnographic approach to the data gathering. It is tailored to gather data that can be used in design, and it follows an apprenticeship model. So the designer works as an apprentice to the user. The most typical format for contextual inquiry is a contextual interview, which is a combination of observation, discussion, and reconstruction of a past events. The context principles emphasize the importance of going to the workplace and seeing what happens. The partnership principle states that the developer and the user should collaborate in understanding the works. In a traditional interviewing or workshop situation, the interviewer or workshop leader it is controlled by a contextual inquiry. The spirit partnership means that the understanding is developed through a cooperation. So consideration for gathering data. So consideration for gathering data. So identifying involving stakeholder. Okay, so involving stakeholder workshop, interviews, workplace, studies. Okay. Mm, general advice for data gathering. Okay, was given in our previous lesson, but here a new few more specific guidelines worthy of note when gathering data for requirements. Okay, so focus on identifying the stakeholder needs. This may be achieved by studying their existent behavior and support tools by looking at other products such as competitors' products or an earlier release of your product under development. So involve or stakeholder group. It is very important to make sure that you get the views of all the right people. This may seem an obvious comment, but it is easy to overlook certain section of the stakeholder population if you're not careful. Mm, Involving only one representative from each stakeholder group is not enough, especially if the group is large. So everyone you involved in data gathering will have their own perspective on the situation, the task, their job, and how others interact with them. So if you only involve one representative stakeholder, then you will only get a narrow view. Support the data gathering session with a suitable props such as task description and prototypes, if available. Since the requirements and activity is iterative, prototypes or description generated during one session may be reused or revisited in another with the same or different set of stakeholders. So using props will help jog people memories and act as a focus for discussion. So Maiden recommends the use of mobile technologies and dedicated requirements application to support requirements activities. So data interpretation and analysis. Okay, so methods and approaches for analysis, interpretation, and presentation of data are applicable during the requirements activity to structure and record description of requirement. Using a format such as the Boolean shell, highlights the kinds of information to look for, and is good for the first step in data analysis for requirements. So note that many of the entries are concerned with traceability. For example, who raised the requirements and where can more information about it be found. So this information may be captured in documents or in diagrams drawn during analysis. Some kinds of requirements are best investigated using more formal techniques and notation. For example, functional requirements may be analyzed and documented using class diagram, state chart, and sequence diagrams, among others. Data requirements can be expressed using entity relationship diagram and so on. So task description, scenarios, use case, essential use case. Okay. A scenario is a informal narrative description. So it describes human activities or tasks in a story that allows exploration and discussion of context, needs, and requirements. It does not necessarily describe the use of software or other technological support to achieve a task. Using the vocabulary and phrasing of user means that the scenarios can be understood by the stakeholder and they are able to participate fully in the development process. In fact, the construction of scenarios by stakeholder is often the first step in establishing requirement. Uh, Telling stories is a natural way for people to explain what they are doing or how to achieve something. It is therefore something that the stakeholder can easily relate to. So the focus of such story is also naturally likely to be about what the user are trying to achieve. Example, their goals, diba? So understanding why people do things as they do and what they are trying to achieve in the process allows us to concentrate on the human activity rather than interaction technology. Then meron tayong use case. Okay? So use case also focus on user goal. But the emphasis here is on the user system interaction rather than the user task itself. They were originally introduced through the object-oriented community in the book of object-oriented software engineering. Okay, so although their focus is specifically on the interaction between the user, code, an actor, and a software system, the stress is still very much on the user perspective, not the system. The term scenario is also used in the context of use case. So in this context, it represents one path through the use case. Example, one particular set of condition, diba? So this meaning is consistent with the definition given above in that they both represent specific example of behavior. Then we have the essential use case. Were developed by the Constantine and Lockwood to combat what they see as the limitation of both scenario and use cases as described above. Scenario are concrete stories that concentrate on realistic and specific activities. They therefore can obscure broader issues concerned with the wider organization view. So on the other hand, traditional use case contains certain assumptions, including the fact that there is a piece of technology to interact with, also assumptions about the user interface and the kind of interaction to be designed. Essential use cases um, they represent a more general case than scenario embodies. They try to avoid the assumption of a traditional use case. Essential use case is a structured narrative consisting of three parts. First, the name that expresses the overall user interaction, a step description of user action, and a step description of system responsibility. So this division between user and system responsibility can be very helpful during conceptual design when considering task allocation and system scope. Example, what are the user is responsible for and what the system is to do. Okay, so scenario for travel organizer. So this example for a scenario. So the Thompson family enjoy outdoor activities and want to try their hand at sailing this year. So there are families members, Sky, 10 years old, Amon, 15 years old, and Claire, 35, and Will, 40. One evening after dinner, they decided to start exploring the possibilities. They all gather around the travel organizer and enter their initial set of requirements. A sailing trip for novice in Mediterranean. The console is designed so that all members of the family can interact easily and comfortably with it. So the system's initial suggestion is a flotilla, where several crews with various levels of experience sail together on a vacation, as sail together on a separate boat. Sky and Imon are not very happy at the idea of going on a vacation with a group of other people, even though the Thompson would have their own boat. The travel organizer showed them description of flotillas that from other children their age, and they are all very positive. So eventually, everyone agreed to explore flotilla opportunities. Will confirms this recommendation and asks for details option. As in getting late, he asks for the details to be saved so everyone can consider them tomorrow. The travel organizer emails them a summary of different options available. So often, scenarios are generated during a workshop, interview, or brainstorming scenario that explain or discuss some aspect of the user goals. So they can be used to imagine potential uses of products as well as to capture existing behavior. They are not intended to capture a full set requirement, but are very personalized account. So offering only one perspective. So the following scenario for the shared travel organizer was elicited in an informal interview. So this describes how one function of the system might work. So to identify a potential vacation option, okay, so note that these scenarios include details about some typical user and their needs. This is a kind of information that you might glean from a requirements interview. Okay, scenarios and personas. Okay, so this one, so the difference between persona and scenarios can be difficult to grasp at first. Although reading about it may seem clear, it is a common confusion to end up combining the two. A scenario describes one use of a product or one example of achieving a goal, while persona characterize a typical user of the product. Okay? So use case for travel organizer. So this is an example of a use case travel organizer. So first, the system display option for investigating the visa and vaccination requirements. Second, the user chooses the option to find out about visa requirements. Third, the system prompts up the user for the name of the destination country. Then, for the user enters the country's name. Next, the system checks the countries is valid. Then the system prompts up the user or her nationality. Then the user enters her nationality. Then the system checks the visa requirements of the entered country for passport holder or her nationality. So in 9, the system display the visa requirements. 10, the system display the option print out the visa requirements. And 11, the user chooses to print the requirements. Okay, so a use case is associated with an actor. Again, it is the actor goals is using the system that use the use case wants to capture. So these techniques, the main use case describe what's called the normal course. Okay? Example na it is the set of action that the analyze believers to most commonly perform. For example, um, if through data gathering, we have found the most subscriber to the movie rental service know the title of the movie they want to rent, then the normal course for the use case would include the step necessary to find the movie by title. So other possible sequence called alternative course and the list of the bottom of the use case. So use case for retrieving visa requirement using a travel organizer with a normal course being information about the requirements and is available might be. So yun nga yung binasa natin. Diba? So ito yung step by step. Okay. Sabi nga, for visa requirements. Okay. So example of use case diagram for a travel organizer. Diba? So travel agent, so ito yung actor natin, yung traveler. Okay, so update si travel agent, after siya mag-update ng travel details. Then si traveler, siya yung mag-identify potential vacation, retrieve visa requirements, and retrieve vaccination requirements. So note that the number associated with the alternative course indicates the step in the normal course. Okay? So yung mga actors natin, nire-represent siya ng mga stickman natin. Okay? So ito yung example ng diagram ng a use case. So example of a use case for essential use case naman tong isa. Okay. Okay, so yung use case may be described graphically, gaya nung shown in our figure 10.11, yung may stickman tayo. Diba? The use case diagram for travel organizer, yung kanina. So the travel agent actor associated with the use case, kaya na yung update travel details. Another actor for the travel organizer is the traveler, such as example kayo nando sa natin is Thompson family. So actors may be associated with more than one use case. So for example, a traveler is associated with a use case, identify potential vacation, as well as the retrieve visa requirements use case. So each use case may be also be associated with more than one actor. So note that an actor represents a role. So when, for example, kay na si Jasmine who works for a travel agency is booking a trip for herself, she adopts the role of the traveler. But when she's working for a travel agent, will adopt the role for travel agent. Then, example, ito naman yung ating essential use case. This one is based on the visa requirement example. Okay, so given above, yung ating example kayo na yung gumamit ng diagram. So note that the steps are more generalized than those in the use case in our previous page kanina. Diba? While they are more structured than the scenario in section or yung our figure 10.6. The second user intention does not say anything about the choosing option or system front. It simply states that the user supplies the required information. This could be achieved in a variety of ways, including scanning a passport, accessing a database of personal information based on fingerprints recognition, and so on. So the point is that at the time of creating this essential use case, there is no commitment to a particular interaction design. Essential use case would normally be developed before more detailed use case. Instead of using actors, kagaya kanina, yung sinample natin, essential use case are associated with user roles. An actor could be another system, whereas A user role is a role that a number of different people may play when using the system. So it is not a particular person and not another system. As with use case, producing an essential use case begins with identifying user roles. Next, we have the task analysis. Uh, excuse. So, task analysis is used mainly to investigate an existing situation. So, it's not used to envision new product. It is used to analyze the underlying rationale and purpose of what people are doing. What are they trying to achieve? What are they trying um, to achieve? And how are they going about it. So the information gleaned from a task analysis establishes a foundation of existing practices on which to build new requirements or design a new task. So task analysis is an umbrella term that covers techniques for investigation, cognitive process, and physical action at a high level of abstraction and a minute detail. So in a practice, task analysis techniques have a mixed reception. So the most widely used version is the hierarchical task analysis. Okay, so the HTA, the hierarchical task analysis. Okay, so the HTA was originally designed to identify training needs. Okay, so it involves breaking a task down into a subtask and then into a subtask and so on. So these are the grouped together as planned that specify how the task might be performed in a real situation. HTA focus on the physical and observable action that are performed and includes looking at action that are not related to software or interactive products at all. So the starting point is a user goal. So this is the examine and then the main task associated with achieving that goals are identified. So where appropriate, these tasks are subdivided into a subtask and then subtasks can be divided further down to low level step of the interaction which may be represented in a screen sketch. So example of a hierarchical task analysis or yung HTA natin. So like this one. So yung first, I order to buy a DVD. Then locate a DVD, add DVD to shopping basket, enter payment details, complete address, and confirm orders. So sabi nga, consider a task of buying DVD. So this task can be decomposed into subtasks of locate DVD, add DVD shopping basket, enter payment details, complete details, and confirm orders. So some of these subtasks might not be performed if the user is a regular user. Entering payment and address detail may not be performed in this case. So this case can be captured through glance, di ba? Siguro yung complete lang siya kapag first time user lang. First time ka lang o-order. Therefore, sabi nga, second time, hindi mo na ipo-perform yung ibang part. Okay, so example of the HTA analysis graphical. So an alternative expression of HTA is graphical box and line notation as shown in graphical version. So here the subtasks are represented by name box with identifying numbers. The HTA relationship between tasks is shown using vertical line. So if a task is not decomposed any further, then a thick horizontal line is drawn underneath the corresponding box. So plans are also shown in this graphical form. They are written alongside the vertical line emitting from the task being decomposed. Use of HCAs have been controversial with both its supporters and detractors. So there are two main problems with using using it on a real problem. First, real tasks are very complex, and task analysis does not scale very well. The notation soon become unwieldy, making it difficult to follow. Second, the task analysis is limited in the kinds of tasks it can model. For example, it cannot model the tasks that are overlapping or in parallel, nor can it model interruption. So most people work through interruption of various kinds, and many significant tasks happen in parallel. On the other hand, benefits of task analysis include: first, it lets you objectively compare alternative design based on user plan tasks and subtasks. It provides a good understanding on the interaction at whichever level of abstraction is appropriate. This facilitates good design, and it supports design reuse again at the different levels of abstraction. Okay, summary natin. So, getting requirements right is crucial. So there are different kinds of requirements, each significant for interaction design. The most commonly used technique for data gathering are questionnaires, interviews, focus group discussion, direct observation, studying documentation, and researching similar products. Scenarios, use case, and essential use case can be used to articulate existing and envisioned work practices. Task analysis techniques such as HTA help to investigate existing system and practices. Again, okay, a requirement is a need that a particular interactive product must be able to satisfy. So establishing what is required of a product is essential to ensure that the interaction is the best possible fit for the user, both terms of what the user needs to do with the products and how experience the interaction. So requirements will depend on the characteristic of the user, the activities the user will perform using the product, and the environment in which the user interact with the product. So to ensure a successful outcome, yung design team must satisfy the needs and wants of the user when development is complete. So to achieve this, user needs should not only be elicited by techniques such as survey, focus group, interviews, etc., but they should also be reflected back to the user via simulation in order to prototype the user requirements. Okay, so the requirements will of course then evolve as the system develops and then more formal and user evaluation take place. Okay, so guys, so that's it for today, and thank you.